Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott. This is our midweek Torah study. We're with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. Just a couple of little items before we get started tonight. First of all, our services are in Fort Myers, Shabbat morning, 11 a.m. We meet, of course, during a time of COVID. Masks are suggested for yours and everybody's peace of mind, as well as appropriate social distancing practices encouraged throughout the day. We don't hug or share kisses, of course, obviously, but also the chairs and seating is spaced accordingly to provide a measure of security for everyone. So, but we do invite you to come and join us with fellowship and worship on Shabbat morning. You can find more details in the description below. Likewise, another item of business, of course, if you want to subscribe to these videos, then you will receive a notification every time one of these videos is published. We are also publishing online our Shabbat services, and we are publishing online the Revelation series, which is something new that we've added just in the last few weeks. And that is progressing at the rate of one or two a week. We will get up to speed and get two of them a week as we go, but for now it's one or two a week, and so you will get notifications on those as well as these midweek Torah studies. Okay, another item, thank you if you have been supporting us. We're just incredibly grateful for all of you who support the ministry of Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue. Our teaching ministry has grown online during the time of COVID, as everyone's online presence has grown during the time of COVID. And we're grateful that we're able to reach many people. We've received many new followers and are able to minister with the truth of the gospel and the Torah. And we're just very grateful for this opportunity. If you would like to support this ministry, you'll find a link to do so. It is through Easy Tithe. It's very simple and very quick. You set up with a very quick account, and then you can give online to our ministry. And again, we're very grateful for all of you who do this. I think that covers it. So let's begin. We are in Parsha 47, Ra'eh. And Parsha 47, if you know what the Parsha schedule is, you recognize that that sets us down to just a handful of Parshiot left until we're done with the reading cycle for this year, which means a number of things. First of all, it means we're almost to the end of the restart, which is what we do. But it also means that the high holy days are coming, which means my life is very, very busy. So this is going to be now the next few weeks. All my attention is going to go towards preparing for the high holy days, of which we're going to broadcast all of our services online. So if you're joining us online, then we'll look forward to worshiping with you during those appointed times. So we're in Parsha number 47, Ra'eh, which means see. This is in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 11 through 16, 11:26 through chapter 16, verse 17. All right, we'll begin with a blessing. We'll begin with a summary of the Parsha. Begins discussion of blessings and curses. Says a blessing if you obey Adonai, and a curse if you turn to idolatry. And then there's two hills, Gerizim and Ebal. And these two hills, Adonai says to set the blessing on Gerizim and the curse on Ebal. And so these blessings and these curse, a memorial thereof, is to be set on these two high hills overlooking Shechem, or Shechem, as we would say. There's discussion in the Parsha of bringing sacrifices to a certain place, that all objects and places of idolatry from the previous occupants of the land is to be destroyed, not even to resemble the pagans in their worship to Adonai. The sacrifices are to be made in the chosen place that is going to be that Adonai is going to choose to make his name known. Next, there's a discussion of the ritual slaughter of animals permitted for food, the ritual slaughter for animals for sacrifices, and then the slaughter of animals permitted for food. that the blood is to be poured out on the ground, that an animal that is not slaughtered properly is not to be eaten. So there's some rules and regulations on how we slaughter the animal. The idea of interpreting omens and any form of witchcraft, which an omen is saying, if a tree branch falls off a tree, the way that it falls on the ground might indicate the future or this kind of thing. Any interpreting of omens or any form of witchcraft is strictly forbidden. Some report that the ancient Egyptians would kill animals and actually drink their blood to predict the future. So these are some of the things that Adonai was prohibiting. Next is discussion of 3 types of tithes. The Rishon, which is the 10th of produce given to the Levite, supporting the Torah teachers and priests. The Sheni, the land itself, is tithed a second time. The first, second, fourth, and fifth years of a 7-year sabbatical cycle, the produce taken to a place to be named, which would be Jerusalem, where the temple is, and this produce in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years is to be eaten there in celebration. The third and sixth year, the Sheni was to be given to the poor instead of being brought to the appointed place. Likewise, when there's some discussion of when you go to Jerusalem, that you are to take people from your town with you, your community, and that you are not to ignore the Levi and bring him with you. And also you're not to ignore the poor. You're to bring the poor with you as well. And you're to take your produce to Jerusalem and to have a celebration in Jerusalem. Okay, the Ani offering, the third and sixth year, is the Sheni was given to the poor instead of being brought into the appointed place. Next was some discussion of false prophets. If they entice you to follow other gods, understand that Adonai is testing you. You are to reprove them gently and openly, but you are to absolutely stone them to death if they seek to draw you away from Adonai. This is not applicable in the U.S. where, and among most modern nations, this is not applicable. You're not allowed to take another person's life. And because we submit to local authorities and local laws taking preeminence in these nations wherein we live, we don't observe some of these barbaric laws as they're viewed by the civilization wherein we live. That is, they would view us as barbaric if we were to stone somebody for witchcraft or stone somebody for being a false prophet. However, Yeshua taught us that laws can still be observed and followed. The adulterer cannot be stoned because the Romans were in charge of justice and executions during Yeshua's time. They needed Pilate's permission to even crucify Yeshua. So they weren't allowed to stone anyone on their own whim. They had to have permission to do this. But Yeshua taught that the laws of adultery could still be observed and followed. So, we look at some of these laws and requirements in the Torah and we say, well, are we going to go out and stone people? Well, of course not, because we live under a different system. And Adonai understands that, and the Spirit understands that, and leads us into all righteousness in spite of the fact that we live in this system. When Rav Shaul writes and says that he has handed somebody over, it means that he has relinquished his perhaps prerogative to discipline that person, and has handed the judgment of that person over either to Adonai or to local authorities or the Spirit or something like this. So this is our option as well. When we come across somebody indulging in witchcraft or this, we don't have to stone them. In fact, if we were to do so, we would be the ones to go to jail. But rather we hand them over to the authorities, or we hand them over to Adonai for his judgment. Okay, continuing on with our summary. It says, if an entire city falls to idolatry, the entire city is to be put to death, the entire city to be burned as an olah offering, and the city is never to be rebuilt again. Just a side note, I don't know if you're hearing this, but there's a window to this direction here, and this is Southwest Florida on a summer day, and we're getting a typical thunderstorm, and so the whole house is resonating with the sound of rainfall. I don't know how this sounds online. It may be quite disturbing and distracting to you folks. Perhaps you can hear it, or perhaps not. But anyway, this is real life. This is some of the things that we have going on in the background. Okay, continuing on. Shemitah is discussed, the year of rest for land, also the release of debts, no longer asking for repayment of debts, no longer expecting repayment after the year, the 7th year. Remember above we talked about the tithes. We talked about the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th when you take your produce into Jerusalem, and then the 3rd and the 6th you take your produce and give it to the poor. But here we're talking about the Shemitah, which is the 7th year, and the 7th year is a rest for the land and a releasing of debts. Some discussion of giving of charity, canceling of debts, and teshuvah, resulting in a holy society, resulting in a holy civilization. These three aspects. If an Israelite steals money and cannot repay, he is sold as a slave for 6 years. On the 7th, he's set free. But when the set-free slave is to be set up with gifts, with supplies to begin life again. In other words, the slave isn't just turned out, he's actually set up to begin his life. If the slave, however, prefers to stay in the house, then the ear would be pierced with an awl, and the slave would become a permanent slave for perpetuity. There's discussion of the firstborn of the flock belonging to Adonai, and discussion of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, to the Mishkan, when the Mishkan was installed. Later, the Beit HaMikdash. Beit HaMikdash is a phrase that you see frequently in Orthodox literature, frequently referred to in Orthodox commentary. Beit HaMikdash is the house of the Chavod, the presence, or the house of the place. It is the temple. There's times of rejoicing and fellowship and sacrifices, and it says the sacrifices are to be made according to their means. So you're allowed to make sacrifices according to what you can afford, according to the regulations. And all of this is thoroughly documented and explained in the commentary and various other places. Okay, that concludes our summary for this week's Parsha. I'll begin with this. I want to dig into a couple things, so we'll see how we do for time here. I'll try not to go over. I try to keep it well under an hour. I think I've gone over an hour a couple times, but we'll see how we do this week. Okay. First of all, one thing that I want to dig into. I went for lunch one day, and I do enjoy authentic Thai food, and so I went to a Thai cafe that I was aware of in town, and they were known to be authentic, and it was known to be good. And I had parked my car and walked up to this cafe, and a lady who was obviously one of the workers walks out of the cafe and walks up to one of the large planters that's in front of the cafe. A large shrub was in this planter bin, and she did something. She fussed around with something at the base of this planter, at the base of this shrub, and then she went back inside, and all this occurred as I was kind of walking from my parking place up to the building. And as I got closer, I looked to see what she had been doing in this planter box, and there I see 3 small dishes with little portions of meat and vegetables and different foodstuffs, and I see 1 or 2 sticks of incense burning there, and it's all arranged very carefully and very neatly. And I said, "Oh my word, look at that! It's a shrine. This is a sacrifice. Somebody is making some pagan offering here in front of this Thai cafe." Now, of course, the Taiwan and various Southeast Asian countries have their own pantheon of pagan deities and this sort of thing, and obvious pagan worship is quite historical and evident in that country, and so it shouldn't surprise me too much that this would occur, but it did illustrate for me the unusualness of this. This is the first time maybe the second time in my life I'd ever seen what was a pagan sort of offering, a pagan sort of sacrifice. I remember one time I was in college. I've told this story before as well, and for an art project, the local town, in preparation for one of the annual holidays, the town had issued large wooden posts. This is in Oregon when I was working in Oregon. And of course the lumber culture and mill culture and forest culture out there is very prominent. And so they had taken several, maybe a dozen large logs and planted these large logs vertically in the park. And then they had assigned various local artists to decorate the logs in whatever fashion they felt they would like to do. And so these logs were decorated in the park, and then of course they took pictures, and it became part of the celebration for this holiday. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was Independence Day or something like this. These columns, these decorated carved columns of wood, became part of the celebration. And so the pictures are on the front page of the newspaper. And I'm looking at the newspaper. This is back when we had newspapers, right? Nobody reads newspapers anymore. So I'm reading the front page of the newspaper, and it shows pictures of these columns, and I'm like flabbergasted. I said, "Oh, look, there's a share of poles. They look like a share of poles." Of course, in the West, we also had totem poles, which is a similar kind of thing. These poles had been decorated in the fashion of demonic representations and pagan deities and forms and so on and so forth, because there was a little bit of a pagan culture out west, as there is in many places in the world. So once again, an unusual occurrence of pagan idolatry in North America. Here's the point of it. We're just not a pagan. We don't have the same experience with pagan idolatry that you have in other cultures around the world, or in other cultures, in history. We just, as in actually worshiping idols, we just kind of don't do that in our culture. A good portion of the text this week is about idolatry, and it would be easy to dismiss idolatry as kind of an irrelevant or an obsolete thing. We don't deal with idolatry. It's irrelevant now. When was the last time your neighbor invited you to come make a sacrifice at his pagan temple to some deity? That sort of thing just doesn't happen. When you were struggling, when your wife was ill, when you were hoping to conceive, or your daughter or son are hoping to conceive, you didn't offer to make a pagan sacrifice for them. This sort of thing just doesn't happen in North America. So we tend to think of this this parsha, these chapters of the Torah, as perhaps being irrelevant or obsolete for us. Let's take a look at what idolatry really is. It's worship of deified beings whose reputation, or to whom we attribute or somehow we convey upon them power. We attribute to them or convey upon them a sense of supernatural or even natural power. It isn't always supernatural power. If you make a sacrifice to appease the god of the weather, what you're looking for is a natural result. You're looking for a natural power. You're looking for it to rain or it to stop raining. You're looking for something natural. It's only since the Renaissance that we've had this scientific basis for life. Rather, before that, there was very little distinction between supernatural and natural. Just as we have very little distinction between supernatural and natural in our modern frame, we just weight everything to the natural. Think of medicine. I mean, what is medicine? What is the whole medical sort of industry? You go see a man in a white coat, right? Or a woman sometimes, but it could be a man or it could be a woman. You see somebody, they're wearing a white coat, and they make up they give directions to make up a potion or a concoction or something, and you take it and you're healed. How is that really any different than if it was 400 years ago and you lived in some undeveloped part of North America or Europe or someplace like this, and you went and you saw somebody wearing a special outfit, and a white outfit, if you will, and they give you a concoction, and you take it and you're supposed to be healed. Do you see the similarities between old pagan medicine, if you will, as in, you go see somebody in a white outfit, which is a priest of some kind, a pagan priest, and they give you something to take, or you do something for them, and they both take a certain amount of faith. Modern medicine takes a certain amount of faith and confidence in the person, and likewise, pagan cultures would demonstrate confidence in their priests. It takes a certain amount of faith for the person who has complete faith. In other words, our doctor has much more faith than we do. We are skeptical. We go see the doctor, but the doctor knows more than we do, so he's more confident than we are. We go see him, and he tells us it's going to be okay. Take 3 pills and call me in the morning. Do you see the similarities between that and going to a pagan priest 500 or 1,000 years ago? Going to a pagan priest, I'm skeptical, but you know what? He's not, because he's the priest, and he tells me to drink this potion and call him in the morning. It's actually very similar. In fact, what was it that was going on behind the scenes of pagan priest, pagan medicine, but that you would have to bring a chicken or a duck or something to pay the priest? The pagan priest, you'd have to make an offering of which the pagan priest would benefit in order to achieve your healing. How is that any different right now than we go and we take, instead of a chicken or a duck, we take an arm and a leg and we go pay the doctor and he makes us well? I'm being light, but do you see the similarities here? I exercise a little faith and perhaps some doubt or skepticism, and many people in pagan cultures would also be somewhat skeptical of going to the priest who is demonstrating themselves as completely confident. So what is it that I am doing when I, as a pagan offering? What is it the person is doing? They're attributing power to a person. In modern medicine, what are we doing? We're attributing power to a person, whether this is done in the pagan temple or in the doctor's clinics. Aren't I seeing something very similar when I go see my doctor? We've spoken a lot about humanism and the legacy of humanism in our society. Humanism is the exaltation of man as the answer and provider for all of mankind's struggles and needs. If I believe that people will provide me what I need, how is that any different than I believe the bush or the shrub god or the random pagan deity will provide me also what I need? Think about the weather. It's an area that is very necessary for all peoples. We need to have certain things as the product of our weather. We need to have a certain cold cycle. We need to have certain sun cycles. We need to have certain hot seasons and wet seasons. But we have managed to overcome the vagaries of weather with electricity production and transmission. We produce electricity. We transmit electricity. Up until years ago, maybe 150 years ago, weather was absolutely necessary for food production, especially in terms of water for irrigation. We now use electricity to extract water from the ground or to move water from one part of the ground to another. A little while ago, it would have been absolutely plausible that you make a sacrifice to appease a deity in order to get rain. Now we don't make any sacrifices for rain. We just fire up the generator and the pumps and move the rain, the water, to the place that we need it. Do you see that both of these reactions, both of these steps are in contrast to Adonai? In other words, on the one hand, I might have brought a chicken to the priest of the rain god because I wanted rain on my vegetables. Or I fire up the generator. It's me trying to manage my surroundings. And do you see that all that, both of those items, perhaps they're not exactly the same, but do you see that both of those items are in contrast equally to ultimate trust of Adonai? That Adonai is in charge and in control of everything. We're still required to do the heavy lifting. We're still required to do the work. But that Adonai is in charge of everything. What are some of our greatest uncertainties? What are some of the areas that we're most uncertain in this life? Childbirth, cancer, disease, very, very large uncertainties. Employment is a place of uncertainty. Natural disasters. If we have a hurricane coming, it's an uncertain time for us in Florida. We're not sure what's going to happen. Likewise, if you live on a fault line in Southern California, you might have reason to be uncertain or to feel the uncertainty of that. Accidental death uncertainties, wars and poverties. How do we really look at these uncertainties? We think of them in terms of our ability to manage them. Consider childbirth, okay? we have whole wings, whole floors of hospitals dedicated to bringing a new child into the world. When a woman finds out that she's pregnant, her and the father, her husband, go to the doctor and they say, I'm pregnant. He confirms with a test that she's indeed pregnant. And at that point, the ball starts rolling, right? She is on a special schedule for doctor visits. She's going to meet with a nurse. Perhaps they're going to do the midwife. Do you see? Vitamins, blood tests, scans. She is scanned. She is monitored. She is evaluated. And then when it comes time, and that's just for the gestation, for the 9 weeks of the 9 months of the pregnancy. When it becomes time for delivery, she goes into the hospital, and she has a team of nurses and a doctor to make sure it all goes okay. We are determined to manage the uncertainty. All that management is not bad per se. We need to do the best that we can to take care of it, because bringing a child into the world is a very risky thing. But notice, at least if you will, that we are trying to eliminate or reduce the risk with everything that we possibly can. And if our sense of control and our sense of stability is in our natural human nature ability to manage risk and to minimize risk, if that's where our sense of stability and security lies, do you understand that that's in contrast with Adonai, who is offering himself as a place for us to be confident of his control? What is the opposite of worshiping idols? It is bringing a sacrifice to Adonai. It is eating in the presence of Adonai. This is the opposite in our Parsha. True worship is relationally following Adonai. When Adonai gave instructions, he gave instructions about where they were to make this sacrifice in these places that I will show you. The places would eventually be the temple in Jerusalem. Do you see that when Adonai established a relational system of sacrifice, it is that relational aspect that allows us to overcome the pagan instinct in our humanity. What is the pagan instinct in our humanity? The pagan instinct in our humanity is to manipulate another being in order to manipulate our circumstances for our gain. Let me say that again. Pagan worship, a pagan sacrifice, pagan idolatry, is the manipulation of a pagan deity, a pagan being, to manipulate our natural circumstances for our benefit. So here's what it looks like. Idolatry, pagan idolatry, is bringing a sacrifice to a pagan priest or temple to make on my behalf, to appease the god of the mother, whatever that would be, the deity of the mother, so that my wife has a good delivery. And there's a sense of uncertainty, there's a sense of risk, there's a sense of fear in there. And so I'm trying to manage my fears, I'm trying to manage my uncertainties. My wife is afraid, so I calm her by saying, yes, but I've brought a sacrifice to the priest who made a sacrifice to the such and such God, so that we have made our entreaties so that your pregnancy, your delivery will go well. All that exists in contrast to Adonai representing himself as in control. But it's an invitation to a relationship such that you don't come to Adonai to manipulate him in order to manipulate our circumstances. And that is the pagan idolatrous instinct in humanity that we sometimes carry into our relationship with Adonai. Let me explain how this works. If a young man takes his first job, he's got his first job, he's working, let's say he works in a restaurant, and he has to do wash dishes. Okay, this is his job. It's his first job. He's never worked before. Previous to that, he used to wash dishes for his mother because his mother would give him chores to do, and one of his chores was he had to wash the dishes. if he treats his employer, he has a tendency to treat his employer the same way he treated his mother. He brings that into that relationship. He has gone from a familial relationship and he has transferred and carried that into his relationship with his employer. Let me offer you a different example. A young man has many young ladies that he's attracted to. He dates, he gets to know lots of young ladies, and then eventually he finds one and settles down and gets married. Okay, this is the way of things in the modern world. All right. He carries into that marriage what he learned from his relationships previous to that marriage, including his familial relationship with his father and mother and siblings, but also these other relationships. He's carrying something into that marriage. Now, this can be both good and bad. I'm not speaking of the value of it. I'm just talking about the characteristic of it, such that when we go into our relationship with Adonai, when we go down that journey of a relationship with Adonai, we have a tendency to approach Adonai the same way you would approach a pagan deity, which is to manipulate. I'm bringing you something so that you will change things for my benefit, for my gain. Adonai, God, I'm willing to do something so that you will do something for me. I'm willing to tithe so that you will bless me. Or I'm willing to keep Shabbat so that you will bless me. Do you see that there is a pagan sort of manipulation going on there? What Adonai offers us is not that kind of relationship. He offers us a relationship, but he offers us that relationship the only way that we could have accepted it. And that is specifically that he offered the relationship to us first. I long to be a husband to them, he said, over Israel. Yeshua says, I long to gather you like chicks. It was a relational aspect that is offered first. And it was necessary that it be offered first, because if we were to approach him as a pagan deity, and then he says, okay, thank you for the sacrifice, now let me introduce you to a relationship, it wouldn't have worked, because the basis has been set, the precedent has been set. We're now stuck in this pagan mindset. But no, Adonai offered to us first, while we were still yet sinners, he offered to us first a relationship. And that relationship began at, of course, Passover, when we became his and entered into that. It was our born again, our new birth experience at Pesach. When we burst out after the angel of death passed over us, and we burst out of our homes into new life. We were a new creation. All things have passed away. We are now new. Adonai provided that long before we came to him with any sort of offerings, tithes, sacrifices. Because Adonai needed to do that so the precedent could be set. Okay, so that's the relational aspect of that. Okay, I think it's very important for us to consider these things as we grow in our understanding and our knowledge. Now we circle back to the whole discussion of idolatry, and if we are honest about ourselves and honest when we look in the mirror, we may likely see that we are indeed sometimes idolatrous in our sort of alignment towards Adonai, when we approach Adonai with this sort of manipulative agenda, as we do sometimes. And all of us are guilty of it, I think, on some occasions. We need to work hard not to, because it's a sin and it's wrong, it's disrespectful, and we shouldn't do that. But I think that all of us have a proclivity towards that, which is why we spend so much time in this parsha on, of not engaging in idolatry. All right, moving on. That was the first point that I wanted to kind of address here. The next point, it's a little more complex, but I think we can get there. So let's try to do this, and looks like we've got a little bit more time left. So I'm going to go ahead. All right. So I kind of concluded the first part of this morning or this evening with this that true worship is relationally following Adonai, in contrast with worship of idols and idolatry. All right. Adonai in the first place gives them instructions of where they are to make the sacrifice. A lot of emphasis on the place. And it's the place I will show you. We know that place will eventually be the temple in Jerusalem. The Parsha opens with a blessing and a curse. A blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. They look like gates to Shechem. Shechem is where Abraham offered his first sacrifice on his way to the place. Remember, Abraham was told, go into the land about which I will show you, the land of which I will show you. That place that they're to bring the sacrifices eventually is going to be the place of Jerusalem. But the gates are of the gates here, Gerizim and Ebal, acting or looking like gates over Shechem. These gates are symbolical of the gates to enter the city. There are a few commentators who have connected these dots. So I'm not the only one who's done this. So you'll find this in a few places probably. So this isn't original or unique to me by any means. But I want to take a look, and the first clue that just jumps out at you is the name of the Parsha, Ra'eh. Ra'eh is see. Where else do we see that Ra'eh in a very prominent way in the Torah? We see it with the name of Adonai. Adonai is called Adonai, the one who sees. Where do we get the name Adonai who sees? Where does the story in the Torah where we get the name Adonai is the one who sees? Well, it's from the Akedah. The Akedah is the binding of Isaac on the mountain. The Akedah is a very formative episode in the lives of Israel and the Jews. Bereshit chapter 22. Adonai speaking to Abraham, and Adonai says, Abraham, and Abraham says, Hineni. Hineni means I am, in a sense of preparation for preparation for the purpose, not as in here I am, you must have lost me, you forgot where I went. When my wife calls to me downstairs and when I'm in my office and she says, are you there? And I say, here I am. It's in responsiveness to her purpose. She needs something. When somebody says something like, what's up? What are you doing? Where are you? It's not necessarily a responsiveness to a purpose. Rather, it's just identification, a location. It's a geographical question. But this is not a geographical question that is being asked of Abraham, and he's not responding to it geographically. He is responding to it purposefully. I'm prepared for the purpose. He says, here I am. However, we're going to see that the idea of place figures very prominently in the Akedah. Okay. Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains about which I will show you. Well, right away, he's going to a place, but it's a place that he's going to be shown. What did Abraham begin his journey with Adonai? He began his journey with the same kind of statement, get up and go into the land which I will show you. So they take the wood and the fire in the sacrifice, and this is important for us to identify. We notice very quickly they take the wood and the fire, right? Because we know the end of the story, that Isaac does not get sacrificed, that Adonai provides a sacrifice on the mountain by the ram caught in the thicket, but he does take the sacrifice. Abraham takes his son, who in Abraham's mind at this point is the sacrifice. So he is taking the sacrifice to the place that Adonai will show. All right? It's very important that we recognize that. It makes a difference here in a moment. Where is the lamb? It must be said, the lamb, it will be seen. Look what Adonai says in the Hebrew. Elohim yereh lo haseh. Isaac is asking, where is the lamb? This might be a little bit out of order here in my notes. I'm sorry about that. Where is the lamb? Isaac says, and Abraham says to him in Hebrew, Elohim yereh lo haseh. Yireh. In most of your Bibles, it will be translated as provided. Adonai will provide the lamb. Actually, Yireh comes from the Hebrew root word ra'eh, which is see. Some will translate it as Adonai will see to the lamb. I don't see the text here as being so rigid. Is it a provided? Was the lamb provided? Absolutely. But there's room for more understanding when we approach this intertextually. Just a few verses before. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from a distance. In Hebrew, Vayisa Abraham et Anah Vayar et Hamachom. Merahok Vayar. Vayisa Abraham et Anah Vayar. Vayar means to see, from the Hebrew root word, Ra'eh, to see. And so on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place, Hamakom. Once again, we have these two ideas, these two words, the place and seeing. We know from the story that Abraham sees the place where they were going, and he loads wood on Isaac. He takes fire in his hand, Isaac's carrying the wood, and the two of them leave behind the young men and go on to the place of the sacrifice. Abraham binds Isaac to the altar for the sacrifice, binding him to the wood. And Abraham is about to take the knife and sacrifice his son. Adonai stays his hand by the voice of the angel. And then we have this in verse 13. Abraham lifted up his eyes, and behold, there was a ram just caught in the thicket, in the thick bushes by its horns. Vayisa Aram et Anah Vayar. Again, we've got this same phrase. Didn't we just have those same words? Vayisa Aram et Anah Vayar. We saw that up in verse 4, and we see that again here. Vayisa Aram et Anah Vayar ve'ineh avil ha'ar ne'achaz basabach b'charna Vayar. Again, the root word ra'eh, to see. Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw there was a ram just caught in the thicket. So Abraham names that place, verse 14. So he takes the ram, he offers it up in place of his son. Verse 14, Abraham names that place Yireh. As it is said, on the mountain Adonai will provide. Once again, most of your translations will probably say something like provide. In Hebrew, Vayikra Avraham Shem HaMakom. There's that Makom from the place. Remember the Beit HaMikdash, the place, the house of the place. The Shem HaMakom Hahu Adonai Yireh. Yireh, once again from the Hebrew word, root word Ra'eh. Asher Veyamer Hayom Bahar Adonai Ye'ereh, or Yera'eh. Adonai Yireh is how it's pronounced usually. Again, this translation says Adonai will provide, but if we use the Hebrew understanding of it, it's Adonai who sees. All right, verse 15. The angel of Adonai called Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I swear, it is a declaration of Adonai, because you have done this thing, and you did not withhold your son, your only son, I will richly bless you, bountifully multiply your seed like the stars of heaven and like the sand that is on the seashore, and your seed will possess the gate of his enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you obeyed my voice. Your seed will possess the gate of his enemies. What is this thing, the gate of his enemies? What was the gate of the enemies that we see in Parsha Ra'eh? You must utterly destroy the places of the nations serve their gods. You must destroy their places. Devarim, chapter 12, verse 4, You are not to act like this toward Adonai your God. Rather, you are to seek only the place, or to see or to look for only the place Adonai your God chooses from all your tribes to put his name to dwell. There you will come. There you are to bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices. We see this in verse 4 of Devarim, of chapter 12. in contrast to utterly destroying the places of the nations. Why are they to utterly destroy the places of the nations? Because Adonai does not want them going to those places. Just a note on the worship of idols. Well, we'll come back to that. We'll try to come back to that if we have time. How are we doing? Okay. So he's having them destroy the places and that all these other places where they were to bring their sacrifices. Verse 11, then the place Adonai your God chooses to make his name dwell, there you are to bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, once again your sacrifices, your tithes, the offering of the hand, all your finest vow offerings you are to vow to Adonai. And then we have this discussion in the Parsha, that you may eat meat in your own gates when it is not a sacrifice. Then it's just a meal. It's just a meat. It's just meat. You are to pour the blood on the ground because the blood is the life, and the flesh is in the blood. The life is in the blood. You are to eat this meat in your gates, whereas the sacrifices and the vows are to be brought into his gates. It says we enter his gates with thanksgiving in our hearts. We enter his courts with praise. This is where we go to bring a sacrifice. We go through the gates into his place. Once again, both these references and numerous references throughout the Parsha are speaking about the place. What was the name of the mountain that Adonai told Abraham to go sacrifice Isaac on? What was the name of this mountain? It was called the mountain in Moriah. This is where Adonai called Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Mount Moriah is also the future site of the temple. It's also the place very near the place where Yeshua was crucified. So we have this context, the crucifixion of Yeshua, being echoed here in both our current Parsha and in the Akedah. Yeshua was challenged in the temple court. And in Yochanan, John chapter 8, we have this remarkable statement. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was thrilled, he says to him. And the Judeans who are challenging Yeshua said, you're not even 50 years old and you've seen Abraham. And that wasn't what Yeshua was saying. He said, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was thrilled. And they say, oh, you've seen Abraham? That's not what I was saying. Amen, and I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. It's not, he's answering, yes, I've seen Abraham, because before Abraham was, I am. They picked up stones to throw at him, but Yeshua hid himself and went out from the temple. This episode took place in the temple, or in the temple court. This was not to be his time. There was to be a time when he was going to be sacrificed. This was not it. Yeshua is the source of the atonement sacrifice, in that Isaac was the pre-echo of Yeshua, and we are the post-echo of Yeshua. And this is the thing that Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw the day of atonement. He saw the day of Yeshua. He saw it and it was thrilled. It says that he lifted up his eyes and saw the place where the sacrifice was going to occur. It doesn't take much to imagine what it actually was that Abraham might have seen. We have other occasions when Abraham saw as in a vision. It's not unusual to expect that he would have seen this in a vision as well. He lifted up his eyes, and he saw the place where the sacrifice was going to happen. That place was up in the mountain in Moriah. This is what I think Yeshua is speaking of in Yochanan, John chapter 8, when he says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was thrilled. So Yeshua is in this moment where he's going to be stoned, and he manages to hide himself, and he goes out from the temple. It was not to be his time. There was to be a time, but this was not it. He was going to receive the full measure of the atonement burden upon him, and he was going to give up his life willingly and voluntarily, the same way the lamb does when it's ready to be slaughtered. but that this was not to be that day. Yeshua is the source of our atonement sacrifice. Isaac is the pre-echo of Yeshua. We are the post-echo of Yeshua. In other words, the sacrifice, the atonement sacrifice is here, and Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac is looking towards it. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is looking towards it, and our lives are looking back. But this center point of history is the atonement of Yeshua, which reflects backwards and forwards. We think of everything as progressive and linear, and it's just not that way. Real time is circular, if you will, cyclical, if you will. All right, so we are a post-echo of Yeshua when we take up our own wood, the same way Isaac did. We take up our own crucifixion stake, it says in the Brit Chadashah. We take up our own crucifixion stake, and we go obediently giving up ourselves as a sacrifice to the Father who passes us through fire unto life. Right? The pagan idolatry was to pass their children through fire, of which I would never do, Adonai says in our Parsha. But what did he do with Isaac? Isaac was to be sacrificed, but only as an image, giving us a vision of Yeshua to come. He was not to lose his life. But that same sense of sacrifice is there in Isaac, the same sense of sacrifice is here. That sacrifice of us, of taking up our own wood, the same way Isaac did, of taking up our own crucifixion stake, is meant to remind us of Yeshua's death for us, of Yeshua's sacrifice for us. We go obediently giving up of ourselves in order to remind us of Yeshua giving up obediently of his life. But once again, the Parsha speaks strongly of how terrible these pagan idolatries were, to pass their children through fire, to actually give up their children in child sacrifice, of which Adonai says, of which I would never do. And indeed, he would never do it. The enemy offers to pass us through fire unto death, if we are his children. If we are children of the deceiver, of the accuser, of the man of lawlessness, then we are offered to be passed through the fire of sin unto death. If we are his children, this is what he offers us. Yeshua began with the offering that brings life. This is what is seen on the mountain of the Lord. It is seen, said Abraham. The hill of the skull, Golgotha, a little higher than the Temple Mount, a little higher than this. And it says in the text that they will look upon him whom they have pierced. They will look up, their redemption comes. They will look up and they will see him whom they recognize. Both Peter, James, and John all recognize Moses and Elijah. All the Jews will recognize Yeshua. Have you thought of this, that when Yeshua comes back, they're going to recognize him? They will look upon him whom they have pierced. They will recognize him. On the mountain of the Lord, it says, it will be seen. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be seen. What is it that they see? They look up and they see the sacrifice of Yeshua. They look up and they see the crucifixion of Yeshua. By his being lifted up, he will draw all men unto himself, the text says. So on the mountains of the Lord it shall be seen, it says, and we shall eat our peace offering meals, our sheni offerings, with him there in his gates. And it says, I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart, because Adonai has given him the gates of his enemies. This is Yeshua, who has earned and has taken the gates of his enemies. So just some deeper thoughts here on the Parsha. As always, just a real delight to be with you. It needs to be said, if you are questioning all this, please reach out to us. Send us an email, contact us through the comments or anywhere. We would love to hear from you. But further to that, if you are considering this Yeshua as Mashiach, as your atonement, if you have not accepted his atonement, because there's two aspects to this. The first is acknowledgement and understanding of him as the atoning sacrifice. Melech Malchei HaMelechim, the King of all kings. He is both the King, which is the King of glory, who deserves our allegiance and our obedience, and we deserves for us to call him King, because indeed that's what he is. But it's also the atoning sacrifice. And you may have come to a place in your journey of life where you've accepted these things, that Yeshua is King and Yeshua is the atonement. But understand this, you have to make a personal decision about that. You have to step into the relationship that is required of that. Otherwise you remain a ger, you remain a foreigner. You're allowed to be in the camp, you're allowed to be in the nation of Israel, but you're not under the covenant until you decide that you want to accept the covenant. Likewise, you're allowed to be a foreigner and a visitor in the kingdom of God, but you will not receive salvation, because you have to accept his atonement personally, entering into that relationship, relationally, entering into that sort of akeda, that sort of binding of the covenant to you personally and specifically. Anything short of that, and you're just a professor, you're just a scientist. You may know the truth, but you haven't accepted it, you haven't embraced this atonement, and so you are a stranger. And I would just hope that you wouldn't remain such a stranger. If you'd like to dialogue with me on this and discuss this at length, I would love to discuss this with you. But just consider Yeshua HaMashiach. He is the Messiah, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. He is Melech HaMelechim, King of all kings, and he is the lover of your soul. Just offering you this, and please consider Yeshua. I'll leave that with you until next time. May Adonai be with you and bless you. Shalom, shalom.